All right, so tonight we're in Mark chapter 3 as we continue our study through the gospel of what Jesus did. Mark, with a brusqueness of pace, keeping an expedited journey, an expedited telling of the story of Jesus. Mark tells us what Jesus did, as we've made note. He doesn't say a lot of Jesus's words. Next week will be one of the notable exceptions to that as we have the teaching of his parables. But tonight we have primarily, again, what Jesus did and some of the controversies he got involved in. And certainly if God came to be among us, we would expect a little bit of things that aren't quite normal, right? And so from the virgin birth and the angelic announcements, and then comes the one who does so many miracles, and he doesn't show up at the religious center, but shows up with the people. Jesus is doing the things that will show him to be God's own son, the Messiah. But for those who had a certain set of expectations of what that Messiah would be and look like, he didn't come in that way. And it's a hard adjustment for a lot of folks to make, and we'll see that tonight. So tonight we have action and reactions build in the third chapter of Mark. And so if we do the first paragraph, verses 3 to 6, we're going to note that there was a controversy over Jesus healing on the Sabbath. Now in chapter 2, Jesus was also healing on the Sabbath. And so this is the second time that comes that comes up in the Gospel of Mark. Now in the Gospel of Luke, this comes up 6 times or so. It's a big point in Luke, these Sabbath controversies. Mark has them, acknowledges them, but it's not a major theme of the book like in the Gospel of Luke. Well, let's read this first paragraph. Mark 3, verse 1, beginning. He entered again into a synagogue, and a man was there whose hand was withered. And they were watching him to see if he would heal him on the Sabbath, so they might accuse him. I got to tell you, this just doesn't set right. That you're seeing if your opponent, your rival, the one that you're growing to hate more and more by the day, you're seeing if he will disappoint you in the way he does miracles. I got to say, that's pretty rotten. You should be impressed that he's doing miracles. They are looking to find fault in the way he's doing miracles. And it may be that they put a man with a withered hand in the synagogue that they knew he was going to go to, so that right there on the Sabbath day in front of everybody in the synagogue full of folks, he actually would heal him. So whether this man was just there at that synagogue and like, oh, let's watch and see what happens, or it's let's get that guy in there so we can trap him, we don't know. But it's a rotten thing to make a point on the other guy doing miracles wrong. But that's the case here. So he said to the man with the withered hand, get up and come forward. So all attention on the handicapped guy. I'm sure this guy has not wanted through his life everybody staring at his withered hand, right? How many people, if we have an injury or we have some disfigurement or something, if we just got a little bit of something, we will cover it up, right? We will make sure people don't stare at that. And here it is in front of God and everybody, Jesus and the whole synagogue. This man is called forward so that they can see how Jesus will treat him with his withered hand. And so he asked them who were looking to accuse, he asked them, is it lawful to do good or do harm on the Sabbath, to save a life or to kill? But they kept silent. And so they're there to make accusation. They're not there to answer questions. Also, there's no good way they can answer this question, because as soon as they say, obviously, it's good to do good things on the Sabbath, if necessary. They don't condemn the doctor for doing his doctoring on the Sabbath. They wouldn't condemn a man who had to defend his life on the Sabbath. And actually, that became quite the issue some generations before the time of Christ in the intertestament period, when the Gentiles under the leaders from Antioch, from Syria, Damascus, not wrong Syrian city. The Greek rulers in Damascus, they took to attacking the Jews on the Sabbath because they first found there was an advantage to it. The Jews were all resting, and they would kill the Jews, particularly on the Sabbath. Well, the Jews pretty quickly adapted to that and started looking for it, and that went away. But the Jews reasoned among themselves, and probably correctly, that just because we're taking a Sabbath rest doesn't mean we all have to let our enemies kill us. All right, so Jesus is asking, if we got important things to do, necessary things to do, can they be done on the Sabbath? And they didn't answer. And so verse 5, looking around at them with anger, grieved at their hardness of heart, he said to the man, stretch out your hand. And he stretched it out, and his hand was restored. All right, so Jesus is angry at them for their hardness of heart. This man's got a bad hand. These folks have a bad heart. And he is angry and grieved. It's sort of like the agony of spirits, not quite to the same degree, but similar to what Jesus suffered as he was at the cemetery with Lazarus, as he was there agonizing in his spirit there. Here he's grieved, and he's grieved over their hard heart. They're in the synagogue not to worship. They're in the synagogue not to learn. They're in the synagogue to accuse, and they're going to use the positive, absolutely compassionate good of the Messiah of God healing one of his injured people. And they're going to use that as the occasion for accusation. And that is just hard and cold and terrible. Verse 6, the Pharisees went out and immediately began conspiring with the Herodians against him as how they might destroy him. So there would seem to be, in the Jewish political structure, nobody farther apart than the Pharisees and the Herodians, the political party who'd attached themselves to the power of Herod. It was a small party, but since it had political power and the patronage of wealthy Herod family, they had outside influence. But the Pharisees, the party of the people, the party of purity, so they said, the party that would only recognize the true king from the line of David, has now lined up with the party that is a sycophantic party to the Idumean king, the half foreign king Herod, and his descendants. And so their opposition to Jesus overrides all other considerations. It's like in Luke 6, it says, they were filled with rage, madness, and they discussed what they might do to Jesus. So in their rage, they compromise what little principles we seem to find the Pharisees having. All right, so Jesus then continues apace, and he goes, and now he's just going to heal and heal and heal. And again, this is action and reaction. The people are flocking because he's doing this good work, this compassionate work in the power and name of God, and the enemies are going to get all the more beside themselves. Verse 7, Jesus withdrew to the sea with his disciples, and a great multitude from Galilee followed, and also from Judea, and from Jerusalem, and from Idumea beyond the Jordan, and the vicinity of Tyre and Sidon. And great number of people heard all that he was doing, and they came to him. Well, Jesus goes out in the wilderness, and he is followed by people, not just locals now. He's followed by those who are, the couple of weeks trip from Jerusalem. He's drawing them from the coast of Tyre and Sidon. He's drawing them from the desert of Idumea. That's Old Edom. Idumea is the Latinized name for that territory, as they had been largely taken over by the Greeks and then the Jews, and then there wasn't much left, but there's still a place name of that. But it's on the other side of the Jordan, as the text says. So from everywhere, people are coming, some of them literally 100 miles. Now, again, I know out here on the Kansas Prairie, 100 miles ain't that much. We get in our car and we do that in a hour and a half, or depends on how fastidious you are about the speed limits. But 100 miles is not that much. But for these folks walking, for these folks going out there who are needing healing, for these folks who are, in some of them, injured and lame and sick, this is a journey. This is a haul, and they're coming from all over. This is the reaction of the common people to Jesus. And so verse 9, he told his disciples that a boat should stand ready for him because of the crowd. And so they're just pushing and pushing one another down to Jesus. He says, get me a boat so that if they push me into the water, I can jump up on the boat and have some relief from them. And so that they would not crowd him. For he had healed many, with the result that all those who had afflictions pressed around him in order to touch him. So we've got the healing going on of all different kinds of sicknesses, and that's one of the marks of Jesus, is the great outpouring of miracles. But with that also, this particular thing of this time, whenever the unclean spirits saw him, they would fall down before him and shout, "You are the Son of God." And he earnestly warned them not to tell them who he was. And so we recall that the Gospel of Mark begins in chapter 1, verse 1, with the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. And the great conclusion, the climactic conclusion, it's not the last fact, but it's kind of the climax of the story, is when the Roman centurion recognizes on the cross that Jesus is the Son of God. And in between, God at his baptism told those present that Jesus was his son. And on the Mount of Transfiguration, God said that Jesus was his son. But then the vast majority of confessions of Jesus as the Son of God come from the demons. And if there's one thing that Jesus doesn't need, it's demonic help. And so they keep confessing him, and he keeps telling them to hush up about it because he's not on their side. He doesn't want them saying anything about him. And we're going to see that his enemies are going to, I think, use this as part of the rationale to accuse him of doing miracles by the power of the devil. Because here are these devilish creatures that keep saying he's the Son of God. So the devilish creatures are saying to some degree, not in totality, but in one or two important facts, these devilish creatures are saying the same thing that Jesus is saying, and they're going to use that against him. Now, the thing they're saying is true, and the thing he was saying was true, but sometimes we're a little bit ashamed of some of the folks that agree with us, even when we're right. And so that is happening. That is happening here. All right, so next then, the 12 apostles. So Jesus has this great amount of work to do. He has many to go teach in many places, and he is going to call the 12 first to go do some preaching for him. And of course, these are the ones that after his death, he is going to send to the entire world. So they are developing a deep appreciation for Jesus. Certainly this work that they're doing here is sort of kind of a preparatory academy, as it were, to the work they'll do as apostles. And when they, with post-Pentecost clarity, after the facts are occur and the instruction of the Spirit given, they will then take Jesus's message to the end of the earth. And they are going to be world changers, some of the most important men in history. But that's in their future, and they have no idea about that yet, but we know where it's going. And so these folks are going to be so important. So verse 13, he went up on a mountain and summoned those whom he himself wanted, and they came to him. And he, verse 14, appointed 12 so that they would be with him, and he could send them out to preach and have authority to cast out demons. Well, here we've got these marvelous displays of power over and over with Jesus. But here's another remarkable one, that Jesus has such power, he can share it. That there's no problem for him. He's not diminished. He's not going to be hindered in anything that he wants to do with power when he lets them have power. And so he's going to share power with them and empower them to be his messengers. So verse 16, he appointed the 12. Now we have the names. Simon, to whom he gave the name Peter, James, the son of Zebedee, and John, the brother the brother of James. To them he gave them the name Barjonas, which means sons of thunder. So that'll come up a couple of times in our gospel readings. And then also to Andrew and Philip and Bartholomew and Matthew and Thomas, James the son of Alphaeus and Thaddeus and Simon the Zealot. And lastly, and Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him. And so what a mystery of that is. We know from the Psalm 69, it was well prophesied that Jesus was going to be betrayed. There's many prophecies about that, but that's one of the most common. That he picked them, that he spent so much time with them. He, even in the last positive act that he had really with Judas, he washed Judas's feet, knowing he was already planning to betray him. And so there was a betrayer in their midst. And so here are these 12 men, and we think about the people who would be first reading the Gospel of Mark, again, this gospel to Roman people, and they would have heard something of some of these names. And now they find out what that meant, who these people were, and what their place was. And so they were the handpicked ones of Jesus. And so these men are Jesus's people now. And so then it says, when he came home, crowds gathered again. So I guess he got a little bit of respite from the crowds by finally, shirking them by getting losing them through the wilderness. But when he comes back to his home base, which is Capernaum, which several of these men were from there, the crowds gathered again to the extent they couldn't eat a meal. Well, maybe it's time to go back out in the wilderness again. But this is the reaction of the people, that there's so many crowded and continual and so many coming and going and wanting so much from him that they don't have time even to eat a meal. Now, at this point, and it's a little foreshadowing of the last paragraph of this chapter, it says, when his own people heard this, so when his kinfolk hear, they went out to take custody of him, for they were saying, he has lost his senses. Well, it's a bad thing when your folks need to come and get you. And they decide, this is nuts. We need to come and bring the boy home. Okay, I know he's 31 or 2 by this point, but we need to go and get him, and we need to bring him home because something about this is not right. And so they are not yet believing, and we'll have a bit more about that in just a moment. All right, so verse 22, as we continue this building reactions to what Jesus is doing, now we have the teaching about blasphemy against the Spirit. And it's their reaction to the constant miracles that Jesus is doing. We know they're hard-hearted about the miracles. They accused Jesus as he was doing miracles. They knew he could do miracles. They watched to see if he would, and they hated when he did. And so that's the kind of hard-hearted folks that we're dealing with, as we saw back up in the first paragraph. And so now some of the scribes come from Jerusalem. So I guess we got the A team of scribes. We got the big boys, the heavy hitters from Jerusalem. And somebody comes up, I guess, with what we today would call a PR campaign. What can we say that helps mitigate, from our point of view, and denigrate and diminish what it is he's doing? So these scribes who came down from Jerusalem were saying, he is possessed by Beelzebub, and he cast out demons by the rulers of demons. So again, how many times have we seen this prominence of demon possession and cures from Jesus with these demons, and these demons saying, you're the Son of God. Of course, as we know from other gospel incidents, right, you're the Son of God, please don't torment us before our time. He's not on their side. They know he's not on their side. But these folks who are also not on the side of Jesus, they're going to use this against him. And so he called them to himself, and he began speaking to them in parables. How can Satan cast out Satan? If a house is divided against itself, that kingdom cannot stand. If the kingdom is divided against itself, the kingdom can't stand. If a house is divided against itself, that house cannot stand. If Satan has risen up against himself and is divided, He cannot stand, but he's finished. And so it's clear I'm here working against the devil. And you say, I've got the devil empowering my work against the devil. How is that supposed to work out? And so it isn't. It makes what you're saying makes no sense. What you're saying doesn't show any kind of moral clarity. You've just made something up. Verse 27, but no one can enter the strong man's house and plunder his property unless he first binds the strong man. Then he will plunder his house. You know, I get a lot of actually encouragement from this figure that Jesus uses, this example, this way of explaining how he's able to just wreck what Satan was planning. What do you think Satan was thinking? Oh, with all these people in this area that are demon possessed, how much mischief does Satan think he could have got up to? And yet all his minions keep getting sent home with their tail between their legs. They keep getting cast out and they keep getting sent back. And obviously this is not working the way that Satan wanted it to. And Jesus said, well, it's like somebody robbing a strong man's house. You don't go into the strong man's house and take his stuff unless you deal with a strong man. Because what is that strong man going to do when he finds you taking his stuff? Well, he's going to go all strong man on you, and that won't be good for you. So you need to bind him. You need to deal with him. You need to, neutralize his ability. Well, in this example, Satan is the strong man, and Satan's being bound, and Satan's being hindered, and Satan is being stopped. And who is stopping Satan? Jesus is. Now, let me ask you, do you think that was just an example and something that was, didn't have a basis in reality, or was Jesus illustrating reality with this story? Well, he's obviously illustrating reality with this story. And then once he's got Satan bound, which certainly the work and ministry of Christ was the great defeat of Satan, right? And Jesus setting free the captives that had been wrongly taken. Paul talking to Timothy that through the gospel, we call to repentance and bring out those who've been held captive by the devil to do his will. Do you think that since the resurrection of Christ, that Christ has let up on Satan? He's loosened him a little bit so he can go back to what he was doing before? I think Jesus bound him up and left him pretty well bound, right? Now, I do know that leads to another discussion we are not going to have tonight about Revelation 20 and the little time that Satan is loosed. But that also implies up until that time, which is somewhere toward the end, that Satan is bound. And so Jesus' illustration here of what he's doing relies on his power to bind Satan. And I think that is reflective of the reality of what Jesus did to Satan. So these guys have totally missed it. They say that he's doing this with the power of Satan, and Jesus says, I have taken his power away. I am whittling down what he's got. All right, so verse 28 then, the part of this that's probably most famous to us. Truly I say to you, all sin shall be forgiven the sons of men. What can Jesus not forgive? I mean, even those that were killing him, what did he say on the cross? Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. Jesus is in the forgiving business. That's what he's come to do. He's come to seek and save the lost. So truly I say to you, all sin shall be forgiven the sons of men, and whatever blasphemies they utter. So you're never going to find a guy who is too sinful to be saved. Whatever it was, whatever taking the Lord's name in vain, whatever blasphemy, whatever lack of respect to God, Jesus is here to say, I'm here to forgive that. Of course, we know that's through repentance and faith in him and coming to him. But that's the summary of what he's here to do. But verse 29, whoever blasphemes against the Holy Spirit never has forgiveness, but is guilty of an eternal sin, because we're saying he has an unclean spirit. there are occasionally people who think they've over blasphemed so much that God can't forgive them, and that they're guilty of the unforgivable or unpardonable sin now. I don't think they are. I don't think we can do this sin now. Maybe that's an encouragement to you. Don't try it. Don't try to find the sin you can't be forgiven of. But the context here is ascribing to Jesus the power of the devil to do these miracles. And it says, because they were saying he has an unclean spirit. And so when people say Jesus is demon possessed, when Jesus is devil possessed, that Jesus is working these great miracles, these great merciful, compassionate acts of God, and they say, well, see, that's the devil acting right there. He's got the devil in him. That's the unforgivable thing. So I think you'd have to see these miracles and think and ascribe to that dark power, the power of Satan and the demons for what Jesus was doing. That is just unforgivable. That is what they're doing is beyond the pale, even what Jesus is willing to forgive. And so, well, certainly let's honor God. Let's keep the commandment, the third one, to not take his name in vain. Let's make sure that we don't do any more blasphemy than we just stumble into naturally. But it is, and I noticed on this screen I misspelled spirit. Oh, well, you know what I mean. But this blasphemy against the Spirit as basically attributing the Holy Spirit as being the devil, that's the unpardonable sin. All right, lastly, then, we have this paragraph. His not yet believing family. And we already saw earlier, right, that his kinfolk thought, we better go get him. They went to, verse 21, they went to take custody of him, saying he's lost his senses. All right, well, now we come back to them. Verse 31, then his mother and his brothers arrived. Standing outside, they sent word in to him and called him. So I don't know if we still got it so much that, like in chapter 2, it's hard to get to the door of the house Jesus is in. Or like earlier in this chapter, they can't even have peace enough to eat. Or maybe they're standing outside so that when he comes outside, it'll be easier to grab him. I kind of think maybe it's that a bit, that when he comes out away from these 12 guys he's been hanging out with and traveling around with, it's going to be easier to nab him and rush him off back home. And so they were standing outside and sent word and called to him. And the crowd was sitting around him. Boy, imagine if they got into a tussle. I know Jesus had, at least 4 brothers, but those 4 aren't going to stand up against this crowd very long if it gets into that. And so the crowd was sitting around him and said to him, behold, your mother and your brothers are outside looking for you. Answering them, he said, who are my mother and my brothers? And looking about those who were sitting around him, he said, behold, my mother and my brothers. For whoever does the will of God, he is my brother and my sister and my mother. Jesus had at least 2 sisters because they're mentioned in the plural in another place. So Jesus had a pretty good-sized family. There's at least 6 siblings. But he said, my real family are those who do the will of God. Now, I've entitled this section, his not yet believing family, because even though it's mentioned in all the Gospels that they didn't believe in him, like John 7:5, not even his brothers were believing on him, after his resurrection, he appeared to James, his brother. And his brother James became one of the leading men for many, many years in the early years of the church at Jerusalem, and wrote for us the book of James. The brother of him he is Judah or Jude, and he writes the book of Jude. And so 2 of Jesus' brothers are prophets who write part of our New Testament for us. And so they are listed with the brethren, and they are faithful brethren, but that's future. And again, we might have some sympathy for them. Can you imagine trying to wrap your head around the idea that your brother could be the Messiah? I mean, imagine that. Your brother, he's 30 years old, he's your older brother. And, he's a pretty good fellow, I'm sure. And I bet him and his sisters, these boys and their sisters, I bet they thought a lot of Jesus. But to think he's the Messiah, that had to have been difficult. His mother, we know, was pondering the things that were happening with Jesus in her heart. There's several statements of that. I'm sure by now would have started hearing the stories from their mother about his strange birth. But anyway, at this point, they're not yet believing. They'll mostly, to all the ones we have record of, they come to it. And we're glad for that. But this statement to end the chapter, of which we want to just look briefly at, we could make lengthy lessons about this. But whoever does the will of God, he is my brother and my sister and my mother. And so think about us being this great thing of being in the family of God, being, as it were, brother and sister and mother to Jesus. Now, the father spot's reserved. Somebody's got that one already. But brother, sister, and mother. And we think about the privilege of being in God's house, right? The church is the household of God, 1 Timothy 3:15. We are made who were once strangers, Ephesians 2. We who were strangers and aliens are now fellow citizens with the saints. We're of God's household. So we're part of his house. In that text, it also describes us as his temple. And so we are part of God's house. What comes in being in his house? We get to be heirs, right? Romans 8:17. We're heirs with Christ. The inheritance of Christ is shared with his brothers and his sisters who came in by the spirit of adoption. We get to communicate with the Father and ask the Father for the things that we need. We get the privilege of prayer. He teaches us to pray, right? Our Father who art in heaven. Matthew 6:9. He is our Father, and we're his family. And Jesus, the elder brother, Jesus holds multiple roles, right? He's the elder brother in the family. He's also the chief shepherd of the family. He is the propitiation for the family. He's our chief priest for the family. But we're in the family. And so the family can ask the Father for their needs through prayer. And the Father gives. Jesus asked later in the Sermon on the Mount, he said, after telling us to seek and we'll find, and knock and it'll be open, ask and receive, all of those things, he said, which of you, if his son asks for a fish, will he give him a snake? Well, you don't do that. And so the Father provides for us. So we have the provision of the Father because we're in the family. And we have the guidance of the Father. Now, again, the book of Hebrews, after quoting the Proverbs about the chastening that every son receives, tells us that no discipline is at the current time pleasant. So the guidance and discipline we get from the Father, that's not always the most pleasant thing to think of, but imagine if you don't have it, right? You're not one of the family. You're not one of his sons. So he guides and he disciplines us as his children. And then directly, what Jesus says here, whoever does the will of God, he's my brother, my sister, my mother. Well, if he's my brother and he's your brother, right? And those ladies who follow him are his sister, and then, so they're my sister. So we get lots of siblings in the family relationship of God. Okay, normally I don't like to write sibling because I like brother or sister, but it wouldn't fit on the chart. So we use the gender inclusive of both brother and sister with the word sibling tonight. But from Mark 10, Jesus, said you need to follow everything and come to me and deny yourself, take up your cross, follow me. And in Mark 10, Peter will say, behold, we have left everything and followed you. What about us? And Jesus will say to them, truly no one who's left a house or brother or sister or mother or father or children or farms for my sake and for the sake of the gospel, but that he shall receive 100 times now in the present age, houses and brothers and sisters and mothers and children and farms and persecutions as well. And so this is what we're given in the family of God. We're given brothers, sisters, mothers, fathers, children, farms, houses, all of these things that they aren't ours by, earthly connection and physical rights of legal ownership, but they are ours through spiritual connection. There are homes open to us. There are people open to us. There are friends in the faith that are closer than our brothers and our sisters for most of us, unless it is that we have the blessing of having our siblings be in the faith and our parents in the faith and our children in the faith. But how many of us have all of that family connection in the faith? Most of us don't. But what do we have in the faith? We got all these other ones. And so we have the instruction to Timothy, don't rebuke the older man, but appeal to him as a father. The younger men as brothers, the older women as mothers, and the younger women as sisters in all purity. And so with the purity of devotion and faithfulness, we have in the family of God a full family provided for us. And so Jesus was making his work in bringing these people to the family of God. And that was keeping him at that point from his family. He wouldn't go back with them. He had a new family he was working on, and that's the family, because he has the power of an indestructible life, that he can still graft us to. And we still have the same relationship with him that those people in that crowd did, that they listen and accept and heed and take to heart with faith the words of Jesus. And so the blessing he extended and to them is the blessing he extends to us. And we see that's the best reaction to have to these things that are going on with Jesus. As we have said, this is the chapter of action and reaction. And the great reaction of the faithful who are trusting in Jesus and learning that this is the one that God sent for their good. But also that horrible reaction of those who want to accuse him in miracle working and want to denigrate the miracles he's doing as demonic. And yeah, the things are going different directions, right? There are those going to God, and there's those going farther away. And so action and reaction as these things build one upon another. Next time, the 4th chapter and the parables that Jesus spoke that Mark records for us. We have a shorter version of the parable record in Mark than the other Gospels, but we'll look at that next week, Lord willing.